Well, good morning, Shabbat Shalom, and welcome. And I'm Rabbi Ed Feinstein, and this is Valley Beth Shalom Torah study for a Shabbos morning. It is Shabbos of Thanksgiving, also Shabbos of Black Friday. So we're delighted that you're with us, taking some time to learn and grow, rather than continuing to finish off the turkey and going out to shop for all sorts of good stuff. I am joined this morning by my dear friends, Rabbi Sherre Hirsch of the American Jewish University, this morning coming to us from the wilds of Idaho, and my dear friend Rabbi Marc Gellman of the Aspen Jewish Congregation coming to us from South Florida, where it's warm and balmy. So good morning, good Shabbos to both of you. It's great to be together. This is Thanksgiving, of course, but in the Torah cycle, of course, the Torah cycle doesn't follow the American holidays, or else we would have prayers for the football. Instead, what we have this morning is the Parshat Toldot. We have skipped over a generation. In the very last Torah portion, Isaac is married to Rebekah, and that's how we left off. And this morning, we are opening up the Torah to a Rebekah who is now pregnant with their two children. They're twins who are completely different from each other. And the story proceeds very quickly to a deathbed scene, even though Isaac isn't going to die for quite a while, but he's afraid he's going to die. And so we have a deathbed scene where the oldest son, Esav, is called to his side to receive a blessing from his father. And instead, the blessing is purloined. It is taken away by a manipulative Rebekah, who wants her son, her favorite son, the second one, Jacob, to obtain the blessing. His name is Jacob because he was holding on to the heel of his brother as he was being born. And as the text points out, he's a heel in every sense of the way. He's a bad guy. He's a manipulative, takes advantage of his brother's weaknesses, sneaks around when his father asks him again and again, "Who are you?" He keeps identifying himself as if he were his brother, takes advantage of his father's blindness, just like he took advantage of his brother's weakness to obtain this blessing. It's not a pretty story. You know, when I put together snapshots of my family into a family album, I take out the ones where the kids are cross-eyed or making rabbit ears. And the pictures that I put in my family album are all of the ones where there's unity and joy and comfort and strength and love and smiles all around. I don't put in the pictures that are not as pretty. But for some reason, the Torah puts in these pictures of our ancestors, which are not particularly beautiful. And here we have a classic example, because if you read, at least you read the Pshat, you read the story as it's given to us, you ask yourself, why would we tell such stories about an ancestor, Jacob, for whom we are actually named? We are Bnei Yisrael. We are the children of this man. Why would we take up these stories in the Torah? Marc, when you read these stories, what do you make of these stories?
Yeah, it reconfirms my belief that the Torah is not a book in which the characters are the heroes. It's a book in which God is the hero. And that's the fundamental difference between the Torah and the Iliad and the Odyssey, where the heroes are the Greek, are the hero of the story. Ulysses, Odysseus, they're the heroes. We don't have that. It's different. For us, it's God who's the hero. So that means that we can have bad parts of the Torah without it reflecting on God. I believe that completely, that God doesn't include bad things in the Torah intentionally. God includes them as heuristic devices, as teaching devices. So in this case, the lesson is mida keneged mida. That is, if you do bad, bad is going to happen to you. So Jacob and his mother, Rebekah, do a bad thing by deceiving their husband, father, Isaac. And in the end, Jacob is deceived in exactly the same way, through blindness. That is, on the night when he's supposed to marry Rachel, Laban substitutes Leah. So it's the perfect example. You reap what you sow. Mida keneged mida. And that's the way I deal with bad parts in the Torah. I don't consider them to be a flaw of God. I consider them to be flaws of people meant to teach us incredible moral lessons from God.
Sherre, how do you read this story? What do you read in this story that gives us some sense of the value of the story if the characters is so questionable?
Well, first of all, I just want to say, Marc, I love that the Torah reads a little bit like a sitcom because he deceives and then he gets deceived. It's a pretty like neged, keneged, mida v'mida. I'm like a little tired today. It's the Idaho air. But what I would say is that, you know, that wraps up very nicely in the Torah, right? That there's parity and there's equivalency. But what I would also argue is that we spend a lot of time curating on social media the perfect life. Like we talk about it nonstop. Fast forward 900 years and they're looking at our Facebook post and they're saying, God, those people never made a mistake. They celebrated every birthday and every child was perfect. I mean, it's so painful for us because that's not our experience. So I believe actually that the Torah was more interested in giving the human experience, not necessarily to protect God, but to protect us so that we would recognize that and see ourselves in our ancestors, that we wouldn't say, I wasn't like them, or that isn't relevant to me because it doesn't resonate for me. In fact, the opposite. Oh, I actually am like them. This story really resonates for me, and it's protecting the longevity and the endurance of the book. And that's why something like the Bible, I know has longevity, but something like Facebook, you know, Mark Zuckerberg may beg to differ, but doesn't have that same endurance.
Mm-hmm. When I was a kid in Hebrew school, I remember I had these wonderful European teachers, and they wanted us to admire everybody. So what they did was an effort, and you can see this in many of the traditional midrashim, a sort of moral flattening of the text. They made Jacob into a tzaddik, and they excused, or they rather contextualized his stealing, his stealing of the birthright, his stealing of the blessing, his manipulation of his brother, his manipulation of his father. And they contextualized and explained that away by pointing out that he was so much more qualified to receive the blessing and to receive the mantle of Abraham, of the covenantal mantle, than his brother Esav. Because if Esav was a brute, Esav was a barbarian, Esav had no internal life. I mean, they flattened it out, and we were told Yaakov was a tzaddik, and everything he did by definition had to be morally right, and we had to reconstruct the story, sort of twist and turn the story to come out as a morality tale to show that good people win in the end. But, you know, reading it as Marc does, I think, and as you do, Sherre, reading it as an adult now, you can see that something else is going on here. There's a much more sophisticated drama. For one thing, the Bible's going to introduce, and this is the midah keneged midah that Marc refers to. The Bible's going to introduce the concept of development. We are not born finished people. We are born incomplete. And it's in the course of a lifetime that the lessons of our experience teach us to be the people we're meant to be. I'm going to give you a preview of coming attractions. So this is a trigger warning. If you don't want to hear this, cover your ears. But in the next Torah portion, when Jacob runs away to Haran, runs away from his brother back to his uncle's house, everything that he did to his brother is going to be done to him in spades. And he's going to understand what it's like to be on the other end of a manipulative personality when he meets his uncle Laban, Lavan. Uncle Laban, who was the ultimate trickster, the ultimate manipulator. And you begin to see something change in Jacob. Then when he marries and has children, you see the change in his character. And while he's never going to completely give up that manipulative side of his character, I don't think any of us ever give up entirely what we were. He's going to understand and gain a soul and understand what he does to other people and have a sensitivity to other people and a little bit of gratitude for the blessings that come his way. And so a lot more humility when it comes to the world that he lives in. The character change is really the drama, not any particular moment, but the dynamic of his character. That's one of the things that we get to see here. Please.
Yeah, I think there's another transition. That's very good what you said. I think it's also, if you look at it from a higher altitude, other things become clear. What we have here is the proof that a Jewish family is not God's intention. A Jewish people is God's intention. And you start in the Torah up till now, you have first a Jewish person, not even a family, Adam, just a Jewish person. That doesn't work out. Then you have a Jewish family, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That doesn't work out because it's too much moral weight to put on a family who are human and have flaws. So what happens finally is that they go to Egypt and they transform themselves into a people. Now, when you have a people, it's a whole different thing. Then the moral flaws of individuals don't count. What counts is the total moral evaluation of the people as a whole. And I think that's what God is aiming at. And God is trying to show that you can't be a Jewish family. You have to be the Jewish people. And even that will have challenges. And even that will fail in the ultimate end of the Tanakh. But I think the lesson here is very clear. These people are good enough to start us, but they are not good enough to sustain us.
Marc, that's really beautiful. I just have to say, this idea that, it's not focused on the individual, but the peoplehood, especially because Yaakov was the heel that became Israel, right? It talks about not only that it's not the individual, it's the collective, but that we as a collective can transform and endure. That's such a beautiful thought. I really love that because it really also weaves into Yom Kippur when we're saying our hates and we're making repentance for the sins of our community. It really is emphasizing that there could be some bad eggs among us, but that doesn't necessarily destroy our peoplehood, right?
Right.
The people is greater than the individuals.
Exactly. And that's also, I think, in my opinion, that's why Jacob's name is changed, like Abraham's name is changed, like Sarah's name is changed. But with Jacob's case, Jacob's name is changed and he's still called Jacob. Occasionally he's called Israel, occasionally Jacob. And so I ask them, wait a minute, what's the point of changing his name if you use his old name? When Abraham's name is changed from Avram to Avraham, he's never called Avram again. When Sarai's name is changed from Sarai to Sarah, she's never called Sarai again. Not so with Jacob. And I think that is another clue in the Torah that the Jew, because it's to teach us that a person, Jacob, cannot be a people. There has to be he's the beginning of the people, but one person, Jacob, cannot be Israel. Only Israel can be Israel.
So I want to take this even one more step higher. I have a hermeneutic principle, an interpretive principle about reading Bible. Look for the questions. Because I have this crazy belief that the Bible, because they're Jews, we always begin with questions. And if you look for the questions, you can see what I think the heart of each narrative really is. So yes. We all know that the first question in the Bible is God looking for Adam in the Garden of Eden. And he says, Ayeka, where are you? Right? And a little bit later on, God is going to ask Cain, where is your brother? And Cain's answer is a question, am I my brother's keeper? Ashomer Achi Anochi, right? And a little bit later in the narrative, we're going to have We're going to have Abraham turn to God and say, "Hashofet kol haaretz lo yaseh mishpat," shall the judge of all the earth not do justice. What's the question in this narrative? It's ironically, it's put into the mouth of Esav. And Esav, after he discovers that he has been cheated, first of his birthright and then of his blessing, and that the father whom he loved and was so loyal to has given away the blessing to his brother, he turns to his father with tears. And it's the one moment you feel sorry for his character. One moment you feel sorry. And he says, as a little boy might say, "Have you not a blessing for me too, Father? Have you not a blessing for me?" And you realize that Esau, for all of his barbarity, for all of his crude character, for all of his impulsiveness, one thing he has is this deep love and loyalty to his father. And when he says, "Didn't you save a blessing for me?" you begin to cry inside as well. And the narrative is there because I think this is pointing out, I think this is one of the leitmotifs, one of the big themes, the melody that runs through the book of Genesis, because the book of Genesis is all about siblings, about brothers. It's about Cain and Abel. It's about the sons of Noah. It's about Abraham and Lot, who's his brother's kid. It's about Isaac and Ishmael, Jacob and Esau, Joseph and his brothers. And eventually we'll get to Moses and Pharaoh, who are in some ways stepbrothers. And the question is there only one blessing? Are we exclusive in that way? To me, I think what's happening here is that this is a corrective to one of the structural flaws in monotheism. You can read monotheism two ways. If you say there's one God, you can read it inclusively and say that's one God for everybody. One Father, as Amos, the prophet, said, one Father for us all. For people of every race and every faith and every culture and every people and men and women and every style in life, we are all under one God, created by one God. That's inclusive monotheism. That's the ideal. But we human beings, we sometimes make it into a weapon of exclusion. And it then becomes an exclusive monotheism, which means God is mine and not yours. You are the child of a lesser God. And that's what this is warning against, because he asks that question, did you not save a blessing for me? Who told you you only have one blessing? Who told you you can only bless one kid? That's not a God who is of all the universe. That is a small, narrow-minded, chauvinistic, tribal God. And that's what Genesis is saying. Don't embrace that, because that's the way of destruction. So there's one beautiful midrash, and then it's Sherre, it's your turn. There's a beautiful statement in the midrash that says, you know when the Messiah will come? The Messiah will come when Esav runs out of tears. When that little boy who says, where's my blessing too, finally comes to some sort of reconciliation with his brother, when he runs out of tears, that's when the world will be perfected. Sherre.
I was just going to add a little blip, not even that was so beautiful, Eddie, but this idea of how do you approach the world with scarcity or abundance, right? Do you see the world as inclusive and that there's multiple pieces of pie and that someone else getting it is not somehow you not getting it and that the world is limited? Or do you see the world in abundance, that there's just plenty? And it really comes down to your perspective on monotheism. Do you see yourself as one God? It was such an eye-opener just now when you said that, Eddie, because is this a God for everyone or is this just ours? And that then informs everything that follows. Marc. Now I'm getting.
I agree with all that. And another way I would say it is in a more philosophical way, is it reasonable to assume that God gave all the truth to one religion? Is that a reasonable assumption? And my answer to that is it is not a reasonable assumption. And that's why I am firmly on the side of the fullness of the one, to give a name to your first option, Eddie, rather than the zero-sum game of the one, which is the other option. We got all the truth. You have none of the truth. You're a heretic, and we need to kill you. Now, the two religions which have struggled with the zero-sum game version of monotheism and still struggle with it to this day are Christianity and Islam. they both have tendencies in that regard. The two great religions in the world that have embraced one is everything is Hinduism and Judaism, where the rabbis made it absolutely clear. Tzadikei umot ha'olam yesh lehem chelek ba'olam haba. The righteous of all nations have a share in the world to come. For Christianity, you have the problem of the New Testament. The only way to the Father is through me. And in Islam, you have similar texts that this is the only way to Allah. So I think ultimately you're right that monotheism presents a challenge. But the truth of it is that there is no real possibility that God is teaching us that everything was given to us and nothing was given to someone else. Even the notion of chosenness does not have to be interpreted as Kaplan did in a negative way. We choose you, God chooses us and not you. It could mean God chooses us, but God also chooses other people for other reasons and in other truths and in other contexts. There's no reason whatsoever to assume that our belief in Bachar Banu is exclusivist. And that's what I've been arguing my whole life as a rabbi. I'm not a Reconstructionist, but I appreciate what Kaplan did in trying to tamp down the xenophobia of the idea of chosenness. And I worry greatly because as I spent all this time in the Christian world with Tom Hartman, I can tell you there isn't a lot of interest that I saw among Jewish audiences of finding out more about Christianity. There really isn't a lot of interest in that. There is much more interest in Christianity in finding out about Judaism. So,
but I think, Marc, the rates of Jews converting out and Jews and non-Jews converting in is almost equivalent. So I'm not sure if that's just a perspective.
Yeah, no, I'm not talking about who converts in, who converts out. I'm saying there is a structural imbalance, that's the way I would say it, between Christianity and Judaism, which is you cannot understand yourself as a Christian without understanding Jews, because you came out of Jews, you came out of Judaism. But you can understand yourself as a Jew without understanding Christianity. And that balance has worked to our disadvantage in understanding the truth that God has given to other people. Because Eddie, if you're right, and I think you are right, that monotheism is about we're all made by the one God, and monotheism is not a zero-sum game. If that's true, and I pray and I believe it is, that means we're obligated to learn the other truths. Mm-hmm. It means we are obligated to learn from other climbers up the mountain. It means that we should all know what the Buddhist fourfold noble truths are. We should all know what moksha, the Hindu notion of release, is. We should all understand what the Hajj is for Muslims, because in doing that we bring the cycle of God's love broader and more encompassing into the world.
Yeah, I really appreciate your love of Judaism and the Jewish people. But, I would love to say we are the more universal faith. We have a more universal approach to monotheism. But unfortunately, I know too many Jews. And maybe it's not ideological. Maybe it's simply a response, a PTSD response to generations and generations of oppression. But there is a tremendous tendency within Judaism to wall ourselves off and say we own the truth and they don't, right? My Bubby, who suffered enough in her life, used to have a whole vocabulary of the people she didn't like in the world, right? And we do have a Yiddish vocabulary of goyim and and things like this.
And shagets.
And a pejorative vocabulary for the outside. And now I happen to think that's not ideological. I happen to think that's a defense mechanism against being discriminated and being tortured and oppressed for so many generations. But let's at least recognize, look, your point, Marc, is so beautiful. And the Torah itself points this out. Because the other classic line in this Torah portion is when Isaac figures it out, and he clearly figures it out. He turns to the boy in front of him and he says, the voice is the voice of Jacob and the hands are the hands of Esau. And it's not just a wonderment about what's happening in front of him. That's the blessing. You cannot do what you need to do in the world based on your own resources. You have to go learn what your brother knows. You have to gain your brother's capacities. Your brother may be a barbarian on one level, but another level, he's damn good at doing stuff in the world, and you need to learn his powers of initiative and his powers of invention and his power. I mean, all of the things that your brother knows. And that, I think, is a beautiful proof text for what you just said. The Jewish faith, the Jewish culture has tremendous moral power, but not an exclusive license on all the moral power of humanity. Go and learn what they know, because the hands are the hands of Esau, and you need to learn what they have in their hands too, if you're going to do what you need to do in the world. It's a wonderful sermon. It's a wonderful lesson for this morning. Well, this morning, as we finish this,
I never thought of that the hands of Esau are necessary for our completing of our mission.
And think about how much you learned, because I watched this in the old days, of how much the beautiful overlap, but more than that, the way that you would look at your brother Tom Hartman and with eyes of wonder as he taught you things, and he looked at you as you taught him things. And it was a beautiful thing to see two men of faith grow in this way. And that's really remarkable. So before we finish, let's take a look at Thanksgiving. This has been Thanksgiving weekend, of course. It's the Shabbos of Thanksgiving weekend. And Rabbi Hirsch had to go and now finish their Thanksgiving weekend with her family. So I enjoy this holiday very, very much. First of all, it's a yontif, but it doesn't have all the rules of yontif, which is wonderful for people of our faith. But it is a holiday. It is the most spiritual of American holidays. It is a holiday of deep and beautiful spirituality. But we just took a break for just a moment to allow Rabbi Hirsch to correct her computer.
McCall, Idaho does not have good Wi-Fi.
Yeah, well, something we just learned. But it has good Torah, that's for sure. Here we are, Thanksgiving, which is the most spiritual of American holidays, because it is a holiday which is completely devoted to the value of gratitude. And gratitude is, I think we will agree, is the first great step in the development of an inner life, a development of spirituality, a development that my narrative is attached to narratives much bigger than my own, and my life gains meaning from what's bigger than my own. So tell me how we make Thanksgiving into the spiritual moment that it is meant to be. Sherre, what do you do for Thanksgiving that makes it a spiritual moment for you, for your family, for the people about you?
It's so funny that you asked that, because my husband is a huge Thanksgiving person. Like, he just loves it. And I'm a huge Sukkot person. So I feel like they go hand in hand, because they're both about gratitude. They're both about gaining perspective. And so Thanksgiving is really his holiday. He fries a turkey, like in the peanut oil. I mean, he's Southern, right? So he fries the turkey. This year we're in McCall with our dear friends, and we ordered a kosher turkey to Boise, picked it up, brought it up to McCall. I guess we were one of only 2 orders in Boise, Idaho. So there was the 17-pound and the 13-pound. I mean, it was actually quite a story. But to go back to your question, to really lean into this idea that we're grateful every day, but to lean into this idea of what are those things, and I know Marc will speak about it, that really make our life truly blessed. And I'll flip it to Marc because I don't want to steal your thunder.
I got plenty of thunder. I got thunder for everybody. So here's my theory about Thanksgiving, which I agree completely, is the supreme American secular holiday. And it teaches us a lot about the sacred time, because here is a holiday that isn't Jewish, isn't Christian. It's an American holiday. And it's devoted to Thanksgiving. And I don't think there is a higher virtue beyond thankfulness. Meister Eckhart, the medieval mystic, said, if the only prayer you ever say is thank you, it will be enough. And that's one of my favorite teachings. So for years now, in my columns, I have, and with Tommy, now without him, I've asked my readers to tell me about the ritual that evolved in Thanksgiving. There's only one ritual that, other than eating the turkey and the menu rituals, there's only one ritual that I find fascinating. Individual families. I haven't heard of an exception to this, but I'm sure there are, basically begin the meal, whether they're religious or not, with, okay, let's go around the table before we eat and say what we're thankful for. Everyone does that. And so I have suggested to my readers of the God Squad column, listen, tell me what you're thankful for that isn't trite, that isn't overused, that isn't hackneyed, that isn't something like, give thanks for my parents and the food and my shelter, my home. Those are all good things to be thankful for, but let's be more creative here. What are the things you are thankful for that no one else would ever think of mentioning on Thanksgiving? And I have a long list of things I was thankful for in the past that I've written about. I was thankful one year for bees and what bees do for pollinating the world, and the threat that they're under from the giant hornets from outer space, wherever they come from, that are destroying beehives. And I give thanks one year for the guys and women and men who climb up the power poles after storms to restore power to people's homes. Very dangerous job. And we never say thank you to them because we never see them. And this year, I gave thanks for lessons that you learned, the most important life lesson you've ever learned, from someone who is not your father or mother, not your parents, and not your rabbi. In other words, from non-teacher teachers, just from people. What's the most important lesson you've learned that you're thankful for? And so this year I gave thanks to a plasterer who helped us in Evanston when we were at Northwestern, fix up a big old Victorian house that we were in there. And one day I saw him carrying a bucket of spackle up the steps. I said, Miladin, that was his name, Miladin Kaladin. And I said, why aren't you carrying two buckets? Why are you carrying, he was carrying two buckets. I said, why are you carrying two buckets? You could carry one, is enough. And he said, yeah, one is enough. But if I carry one, it throws me off and it can hurt and stretch me and hurt my back. If I carry two, I'm in balance. And then after he said that to me, I realized this was one of the teachings of my life that I had just encountered. And I developed this whole theory, which I've lectured to psychiatric associations about. It's called spiritual balancing. What I do with people, particularly those in grief or in depression, and I don't do individual counseling really, I just try to get them to trust me enough to refer them to people who do this for a living. But I say, look, give me 5 minutes of kvetch, 5 minutes of what's bad that you're depressed about or angry about. Go ahead, 5 minutes. And after 5 minutes, I say, okay, good. Now I want 5 minutes of what you're thankful for. Exactly the same amount of time, but what's good in your life. And unbelievably, these people, when they're done with my exercise, feel better, which proved to me it's not just that things were bad in their life, it's that that's all they were thinking about was the bad stuff. And one of the great moves out of depression and out of grief is to balance what you think about, to balance your sense of loss with your sense of gratitude. And that's called spiritual balancing. And I learned it from a plasterer.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. It's Thanksgiving is a wonderful time. I think it's one of our very few American customs that's universally kept. And I'm really grateful, by the way, this year, I was reading in the paper that because of the great resignation, so many people that have left their jobs, stores are not opening Thanksgiving. They're going to stay closed at least until Friday. And I think that's actually very nice, that we take a step away from commerce and economics, a sort of Shabbos, to allow families to be together, to allow people to be with friends, to allow us all to take a big, deep breath and say thank you for the gifts of this moment of life, for all of the problems that we face. Thank you for the gifts of this moment. So thank you to my dear teachers, Rabbi Gellman, Rabbi Hirsch. Wish you a very happy holiday weekend. We'll see each other next week as we pick up the next Torah portion. Of course, there'll be service from Valley Beth Shalom following this broadcast. And this coming week, minyan in the morning, in the evening, 7:30 and 5 o'clock. This coming week, my College of Jewish Studies, our close reading of the philosophy of Abraham Joshua Heschel will continue at Valley Beth Shalom and here online at 7 o'clock on Wednesday evening. I wish you a very, very good Shabbos and a very, very pleasant continuing of your Thanksgiving weekend. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Happy